Hello again, YouTubers and record collectors everywhere. The first album I'm going to show you from this batch is Janis Joplin, Big Brother and the Holding Company, Cheap Thrills, which was really their second album. It was the first one on Columbia. They had an album prior to this on Mainstream Records. But this is the one with the Robert Crumb cover, and fantastic, fantastic cover. Crumb is an amazing cartoon artist, and he's an amazing record collector as well. You should see his movie. If you haven't seen the Crumb movie, it's definitely worthwhile. Gatefold sleeve with Janis and the band there on the stage. I think guitarist Sam Andrews passed away recently. This is from 1968, I believe, and has the hit single Piece of My Heart, which is just a scorching record. The next album is the Best of Nina Simone on RCA Records. I don't have any Nina Simone until now, so I was pleased to find this one. Mike and the Mechanics. Mike and the Mechanics was an offshoot of Genesis. Mike Rutherford formed the band, and this album here was a very popular album in the 1980s. Quite a good record. One of the things I liked about Mike and the Mechanics was the vocals of Paul Carrack. And Paul Carrack, everyone's probably heard Paul Carrack, but you don't know his name. At first he was in a band called Ace, and they had a big hit single in the 1970s, How Long? Later on he joined the band, was it Squeeze, I guess, and Tempted. He was the singer of the song Tempted. And he was also the vocalist in Mike and the Mechanics. The Perth County Conspiracy does not exist. Perth County Conspiracy this is a Canadian album, kind of a folk collective from Stratford, Ontario. They had 2 or 3 albums in the early 70s. This one I think is from 1970, and the first album. There were a couple draft dodgers I think in this band too, but it's a fairly obscure Canadian folk album, but very interesting. Gatefold sleeve, you know, very hippie-ish looking photographs in here. It's kind of an acoustic album. Very nice and homespun. Taj Mahal. This is his first album on Columbia. He had many albums, I think, on Columbia. And flip it over. Very plain cover, back cover. Ry Cooder plays on this. Ry Cooder and was with Taj Mahal, I believe, in a band called the Rising Suns prior to this. Feargal Sharkey. Feargal Sharkey was in a British band, new wave punk band, late 70s, early 80s, called the Undertones, who had a lot of success in Britain, not so much in North America. This is his solo album from 1985, and he did have a hit single in Canada and in Britain. I don't think it did very well in the States. The hit single was called A Good Heart. It's the first song on this album. Everyone knows this one, Beatles Rubber Soul. I don't know how many copies of this I have. This one's from the 1980s. Canadian stereo copy. Maggie and Terry Roach, Seductive Reasoning on Columbia. This is from the mid-70s. I think it's the Roach sisters' first album, and they've had quite a few albums since then. There's a third sister, maybe her name's Susie or something, but you know, Paul Simon's on this album. I haven't played this yet. I don't know what it's like. Oh, Paul Simon actually produced this album. Bob Dylan, Nashville Skyline. This is from 1969, contains the hit single Lay Lady Lay, and which is one of the few songs that he really does a good vocal job on, I think. Recorded in Nashville, of course, and he also has the duet with Johnny Cash on this album, Girl from the North Country. Now the next couple albums are very Canadian, Eastern Canadian. Stan Rogers, Northwest Passage, very famous Canadian, Eastern Canadian maritime folk singer, and wonderful voice, very popular in Canada. Nice cover. It's kind of a homespun album as well. This album, Stan Rogers for the Family, from 1983, and unfortunately Stan lost his life in an airplane accident. A plane caught fire on a runway in Cleveland, Ohio, or Cincinnati or somewhere, and unfortunately Stan lost his life. And this is the album that was released right at the time of his death. Pink Floyd. This is one of the 80s albums. I think this one's called The Final Cut, which was essentially a Roger Waters solo album. And it was at a time where there was great dissension in the band. I think Rick Wright had already left the band at that point. I don't even think he's on this album. And it was not particularly well received compared to some of the other albums. There's supposed to be a tie-in with The Wall. I'm not quite sure what it is, but Roger Waters left the band after this. And then about 3 years later, or 4 years later, Dave Gilmour got together again with Nick Mason and Richard Wright and recorded A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Nice gatefold cover. Now, my own preference for Pink Floyd is really the Syd Barrett first album, and Metal and Dark Side of the Moon, of course. You can't not like those albums. But Syd Barrett, I'm a huge fan, and I love the first album, Piper at the Gates of Dawn. They became, I think, far more commercial and in some ways less musical in the 1980s, but they were very popular, and it's a nice one. Thank you for watching.